Thank you so much for joining us, Unni, here on the second episode, I believe, of Logically Speaking. It's a short video series, as I mentioned, where we're looking to speak to industry experts like yourself, get some tips and understand a bit more about the world of data science and analytics. And as I said, get some tips for both job seekers and also companies looking to hire. So over to you, Unni. I'd love to learn a bit more about you, and I guess, first of all, who are you and how are you doing?
Great. Well, thanks for doing this. It's a pleasure to be here and talking to you. My name is Unni Nambudripad. I currently lead the data and analytics team at a company called Candid that I'm happy to talk about more in detail. I consider myself a generalist data practitioner with a focus on data analytics. My background is a mix of software engineering, some technology consulting, some strategy consulting, and then a variety of different roles in the data and analytics sphere, all of which kind of culminated in me taking this role up here at Candid.
And I was kind of interested to know more about that, because the path of data scientists and data leaders in all sorts of ways is very varied. So how did you get into it? Can you talk to me a bit more about your path into kind of data analytics in that space?
Yeah, for sure. Kind of the uninteresting part of that is that I stumbled into it. But it's also interesting when I reflect back. I was never a person that really sort of meticulously planned what my 3, 5, 10-year goal would be from a career standpoint. I essentially followed interesting leads and opportunities that just kind of happened to come along. And in some cases took some decisions that were somewhat questionable at the time, but it's actually one of those decisions that led me into the data analytics world. So several years ago, I was working at a large consulting firm, and this opportunity came up to work at a much smaller firm, also in the management consulting space, but a company that many people hadn't heard of. It was a Paris-based company called Mars & Company. We had a small presence at the time in the US. But I had heard of them in my research previously, and especially during the interview process, I think their model really resonated with me. And their model was very much a bottom-up data mining from first principles to identify patterns, and then you work with your client counterparts to really identify what are the implications, how can we act on that data, which I think was very different from the model that many of the other larger companies in the consulting space followed, which was very much a top-down, hypothesis-driven approach. There's definitely merit in both approaches, but as an individual, I think the latter approach sort of resonated with me, which was, the skills you bring to the table is really sort of understanding the patterns in the data related to that business problem we're looking to solve. And then you work very collaboratively with the clients who are the subject matter experts in the business. And so that was really my entry into data mining at the time, which is kind of the term that we were using, really the data analytics world. And then that sort of led me into different roles within that data analytics world, if you will, in the corporate world as well. But by and large, I think fundamentally the principles you apply kind of stay the same, regardless of what business you're working with or what problem you're looking to solve for. And I think that few years of experience in that particular firm really sort of allowed me to learn the chops.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to ask that, are there a lot of transferable skills you think, and you've already kind of alluded to that, where you can draw upon a lot of experiences in the world of data and analytics? Do you feel that made it easier for you?
Yeah, for sure. I think there are, with data analytics, I think there are technical skills for sure, right? You need to be very, very good at SQL. I think more and more we're seeing SQL kind of being this universal language for analysts.
Definitely.
And as you kind of get into core data science and so on, there are other technical skills that you need to have. But beyond that, the role, if you really take a step back, the role of a data analyst is to answer interesting or strategic business problems that are oftentimes open-ended and ambiguous in nature. It's not prescribed to you exactly what you're looking to achieve, right? So I think what separates a really good analyst from the rest is your ability to structure how you solve a business problem, and then being able to build that narrative and tell it in a way that it sort of resonates with your business partners, right? So it's really about that storytelling aspect, which is, I think, what I was able to learn from all of the smart people around me when I was in consulting, because it's all about sort of answering vague business problems using data in this case at Mars and Company, right? So I think the skill that I was able to sort of take with me from those experiences was, how do you break down a business problem? How do you kind of structure it? And once you have that structure in place, it becomes much easier to identify, okay, then what data do we need to be able to sort of answer those different steps in that process? And then once you have that, the actual analysis part itself sort of becomes interesting, and in some ways it becomes easy, right? Otherwise you're trying to otherwise typically it leads to more of a paralysis by analysis, as the cliche goes, right?
Absolutely. And I hear that ability to solve problems and show how you're solving problems come up time and time again. I think that's an invaluable skill, really. Awesome. So I guess kind of moving it forward to where you are now at Candid, how did you get there, and how is Candid? Can you tell me a bit more about the business and what you do there?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So Candid is a health tech startup that is focused on providing orthodontics as a service to both dentists and general practitioners and orthodontists, as well as directly to the retail consumers who are looking to straighten their teeth. So we kind of have multiple distribution channels. We either work directly with the dentists, so that is a B2B model that we have. We also have a direct-to-consumer model where we can sort of send these kits and so on that can get them started on that journey, but with the backing of an orthodontist that they can continuously have conversations with remotely, right? So this is really sort of disrupting the oral care and especially the teeth straightening industry to make it much more accessible to people, much more affordable, and make it like a seamless and convenient and enjoyable experience for all parties involved. And that hasn't been necessarily the case in the past, where it has been largely owned by one big firm. And what companies like Candid is trying to do is to really deliver that quality of outcome, that that clinical outcome, without having this burden of having to spend an inordinate amount of money as a patient. And there's a lot of market out there, and a lot of people don't do it just because they can't afford to do it. So we build the technology and the products and the innovation behind the scenes to be able to deliver that experience.
That's awesome, and it's really cool to kind of hear you speak passionately about it as well. And I know that there's so many different areas you can apply data science and data analytics to. And I hear from a lot of candidates I work with that they really want to solve problems that are going to benefit people's lives, and know that the work they're doing is having a positive impact. So it's really cool to hear you speak so passionately about it and understand it's such a great product, really.
It's very exciting times also for us. We're kind of exploring new channels and new partnerships and so on. There's this whole connection with overall health and kind of many different ways we can influence people and create outcomes for them. So it's a very exciting time, and this opportunity really came up about a year ago, kind of organically, as I was thinking what to do next. And again, this was one of those instances where I just ended up speaking to a variety of different people here at Candid, including all of the leadership team and some of my back then members in the data and analytics team, as well as kind of some of the business stakeholders and so on. And in many ways, this opportunity just seemed like where I can use all of the different experiences I've had in the past and kind of bring them all into one. Because here at Candid, we have this centralized data team that owns the entire end-to-end spectrum of data and analytics value chain, if you will, right? So all the way starting with kind of the data infrastructure and governance and data management and data pipelines, to the data transformation piece, to the BI and reporting aspect of it, to doing sort of advanced analytics and data science. And in my previous roles, when I led some teams in other larger or medium to large firms, these functions were kind of scattered around, and it was not all housed under the same umbrella. And here at Candid, I think what resonated with me was the opportunity to have that ownership of the end-to-end data analytics value chain, right? And I think obviously it was also exciting for me to come join a startup. I mean, what was also interesting is we had gone past kind of the early stage scrappy startup phase, and we were more in a growth stage. So some of the foundational blocks had already been built, but we were really gaining momentum and looking to kind of take it to the next level. So that's really what excited me about this role.
Smart, awesome. No, I mean, as I said, again, it's it's really key and great to kind of hear you speak passionately about it. And I'm curious to know then, what does the role actually entail then as a VP, of analytics there? I'm sure you wear a few different hats, but what does your role actually involve?
Yeah, so it's really leading the team of analysts. We are, like I said, a centralized team that supports the entire organization. So all the way from advertising and marketing to kind of operations and sales and support and the entire spectrum from a functional standpoint. And from a skill set standpoint, like I said, we have everyone from kind of data or analytics engineers in the team to generalist analysts, as well as data scientists. So we kind of provide all kinds of data and reporting and analytical services and products needed for the organization to make all of the decisions that we're looking to make, right? So it is sort of that center of excellence model that we have here in Candid, and we own the entire data stack. Over the years, we've transformed into having kind of what's currently called as the modern data stack. So we own everything from the ETL layer to all of the data transformations, and like I said, the visualizations and the analytics piece. And oftentimes, the way we work is every quarter, we sit with the stakeholders and identify what their priorities and initiatives are. And then that gets translated into our own roadmap of initiatives. And we build that plan together and we deliver on it. And I think that approach, what it helps us with is it helps us be much more proactive as opposed to a service-oriented data organization. And I think I've seen this in the past where centralized data teams could fall into the trap of being more of a reactive service providers and just sort of providing data or providing some reporting and building some dashboards. But what this model, kind of working very closely and collaboratively with our stakeholders up front and having a seat at the table, what that allows us to do is be a lot more thoughtful and proactive in terms of what are the items that we should be working on, let's say this coming quarter or in the year ahead. What are sort of the capabilities that we need to build within the firm that will help the company achieve the goals and objectives that they've set.
Yeah. Awesome. That's really cool, and something to put you on the spot that you kind of drew upon at the start of the conversation just before we started recording was about the kind of direction of the industry and how things are going. And it's clear you've been able to reflect and draw upon your previous experience to kind of come up with and kind of lead a team now and work it so effectively in the business. So I guess moving forward over the next kind of 3-4 years, how do you see the industry evolving and which direction you think is going to take?
Yeah, great question. I think a lot of companies are still struggling to truly become data driven, right? I think Candid is an example of a company that is actually very data driven. In pretty much every meeting we have, we're either looking at some spreadsheet of data or reacting to some dashboard, and there's always something we bring to the table. And this goes from every executive, like our CEO himself is very data oriented, and when he has the time and the capacity, he's ready to roll up his sleeves and kind of dive in. But even then, I think companies who want to be highly data driven still face the challenge of not really kind of meeting that promise or being able to deliver on that promise. And I think part of that challenge is because the data is not really integrated with the let's say the environment or the platforms where decisions are being made necessarily, right? I think if you think of the current data stack, which I'm a big fan of, and I think it's come a long way in the last 5 years or so, but I still think it's sort of, kind of residing in its own silo. So if you think about a BI tool, for instance, right? Let's say a Tableau or Looker or what have you, it is still an instance. It is an application that is sort of sitting independently, where you have all of this beautiful visualizations and exploratory analysis and all of that built in, but it's not necessarily integrated with, let's say, the applications that the marketing teams are working on a day-to-day basis, or the sales teams are working on a day-to-day basis, or the executive team is interfacing with, right? And I think the big nut to crack in the next 2 to 3 years is, how do we build those really integrated experiences such that data is sort of sprinkled in where decisions are being made? And I think a great analogy that I've heard recently is when you think about eating out, right? You go to Yelp or you do a Google search and kind of figure out what your options are and look at ratings, and all of that information is there in front of you, and you don't think that as a platform where you have a bunch of charts and visualizations and so on, right? You don't think of it as a data platform. You just have that information seamlessly integrated into kind of the decision you're making. And I think that's really what will enable companies to truly sort of meet that promise of being like fully data driven. And I don't
absolutely.
think we're quite there yet. And it'll be interesting to see how we make our way there.
No, I mean, it's an exciting vision, and I think that would be really cool. And I'm sure there's so many different ways you can apply that to different industries and businesses. And it's a really digestible analogy to kind of understand what you're saying there.
It's not my original analogy, but I think it really resonated with me. So I thought I'd share
well, you've got credit for it here on Logically Speaking, so I appreciate it. Awesome. Well, what I'd like to do now is to kind of speak to you more as a hiring manager and understand and learn a bit more about the hiring process. So it's kind of, first of all, when speaking to candidates, we often get asked for advice on, what route can I take to get into data scientist in terms of my early career. And in your experience, but I know your background's quite different to a lot of others. What is a good way to get into data science, and what experience have you had when hiring that you found the best kind of background people have come from?
Yeah, for sure. So we, when we hire for our roles, we don't really make a big distinction between data science role and data analytics roles. And the reason for that is, again, going back to some of the earlier points we were talking about, I think what we are really looking for are people who have the ability to sort of think creatively about problems and kind of understand how to approach problem solving, and then from a delivery standpoint, understand how to kind of structure that analysis and tell the story of what we are trying to tell, right? So the way we structure our interviews, we typically have like 4 core competencies that we look for, and one of which is technical for sure, right? I think that is table stakes. And anyone looking for a data science role obviously need to have those technical skill sets, both from kind of a solid understanding of SQL and R, Python, and some of the standard programming languages, as well as some of the approaches, typical sort of approaches we use from a machine learning algorithm perspective to be able to solve typical business problems. But I think beyond that, what we really focus on is we do a case study where we provide a business case with some data thrown at it, and then really try and understand and like how they think about it, the problem. And the objective of that exercise is for them, with limited information and with a relatively vague question, be able to drive to some sort of recommendations. And there are no right or wrong recommendations, but what we focus on is the thought process behind that.
Sure.
And then additionally, I think the other two competencies we test for are, one is business savvy. So again, if you're recruiting someone to primarily work with marketing analytics or marketing stakeholders, then we test for some of the aspects related to that function. It could be true for other functions as well, or if not, it could even be sort of general business savvy. We test for that. And then there's another round that is focused more on kind of stakeholder management, because I think that's another very, very key aspect. I think traditionally we've thought of data scientists as people who would just kind of hunker down and like just build models in sort of, go to their cave and build models type of scenario. But I think what has become very clear in the last few years is that model doesn't necessarily set them up for success. I think a critical component of making sure that they're successful is to be able to understand that the business problem and really the questions that their stakeholders are looking to get answered. And so having that relationship, building those relationships within that environment, within that company, and being able to sort of, get those questions out of them in a way that we can structure the analysis and deliver value is a critical aspect of it. So we test for those competencies, and oftentimes what we see is people who do really well on the case study and sort of the stakeholder management and some of those aspects are the people that end up becoming more successful.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a tricky one to kind of summarize there. And I suppose, in some ways you can't learn those things really when it's talking about the way you approach a problem and thinking logically. And it's quite hard to train and develop those kind of skills, which I suppose comes with experience. But I think,
sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, one thing you did touch on there was the kind of communication really, and the data storytelling. And I think that is critical in my mind of really kind of finding the best data scientists out there are those who can articulate the data in a way that's digestible for people like me and those who don't know the technical know-how of it.
Exactly. It's building that empathy to be able to like put yourself in the shoes of your stakeholder. And to your point, I think, that's what a good leader needs to do. I think especially in the data and analytics world where you can't have courses to teach how to do storytelling or how to build that narrative. And I think it's the duty of a leader to provide that direction, but not necessarily spoon feed them, right? So you shouldn't be owning the narrative piece, but you should be providing that guidance. And by making sure that you're giving that guidance, but then taking a step back, you're teaching them to fish as opposed to you fishing for themselves, right? And that's
definitely.
Yep.
No, awesome. No, I couldn't agree more. And I think it's that kind of nurturing the ability and kind of directing people to make those decisions and learn from you. And I think the mentoring aspect in the world of data science and analytics is key and is really critical to kind of developing the next generation and so on and so forth of great minds. Awesome. And is there any other kind of general tips you would have for job seekers and whether that's people just starting out their career or people who are sort of director and VP, any other tips you would have for people looking for their next job in data science?
Yeah, I think what I would say is just try and wherever you are, just try and talk to people and kind of build on your business knowledge, how companies work and how people think and what are, like constantly look for ways of how we can add value. And I think, and I tell my team this all the time, we can add value even without building like the most fancy models. And oftentimes it's when you sort of solve for the simplest thing in a very simplistic manner is when you add the most value. It's a little bit counterintuitive, but I think the one tip I would say is, again, focus on how is it that we can actually add value and drive outcomes, as opposed to how do I continue to build the most sophisticated, complex algorithm or models, right? Because as a data scientist, what I've observed is 80% of the time you're working on kind of solving general business problems, and maybe 20% of the time you are building models to automate high frequency decision making, right? Like predictive underwriting in the insurance world. And like that is something you just need to like build in a way that it's repetitive. But like most times you're working to solve a one-off business question. And for that, what you really need to know is like, how can we get to the answer in a accurate enough way, in a directional way that can actually create some momentum and help the company move forward, right? So the way to get that done, I think, in early stages of your career is to put yourself out there, talk to people, understand how they work, understand how they think, what are the problems that they're working on, how do they prioritize their initiatives, how do they think about customers and all of that stuff. And I think those are the types of information that the earlier you can get in your career will set you up for success as a good storyteller, narrative-based data scientist.
Yeah, that's really great and really helpful. And I'm sure some people will watch this and take quite a lot from that. So thank you. And I guess kind of borrowing more advice from you, and I'm mindful of the time. I don't want to keep you for too long, Unni.
Yeah, no problem.
But advice for companies now and those companies, small and large, who are looking to hire. What do you think employers can do to kind of make for the best interview and hiring process?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to really understand why you're hiring for these roles and what are the objectives and what does success look like for someone in that role, right? I think in many cases, companies look to hire data scientists because it's kind of the fancy thing that they can do and sort of show that, oh, now we have data scientists in our team. But I think it's really, really important to be thoughtful and deliberate. And oftentimes, in many cases, data scientists should really be sort of the last piece of the puzzle you're solving for, right? And I think it is one of the most valuable skills that a data team can bring to the table to really add value from data for companies. But having said that, I've seen these roles and some of these teams not really be set up for success because you kind of jump into this way too early without really understanding why is it that we're doing this, right? And I think if you go back a few years when we had this explosion of big data and all of these technologies to support structured and unstructured data, I think in hindsight, the mistake that a lot of companies did was we thought that we could have all of this great data and bring in a lot of smart individuals, match them together, and we'll have great insights. I think what we missed is this layer in between. We need to build this whole ecosystem around the data that actually helps data scientists be successful. And that is the tooling and the technologies that you need, a high performant data stack that supports your modeling and all of that work. So I think companies just need to make sure that they are at a phase where they're ready to go down this path. And then specifically, what kind of business problems are we looking to solve? Otherwise, I just think that we end up not leveraging these amazing skill sets to the fullest capability, right? So I think just being thoughtful and deliberate about the process is need to do.
Definitely. And then in terms of bringing people onto the business, so you've gone through the process, you've hired an awesome superstar. what's the best way to onboard them, and what do you think is really important to bear in mind for any new starter, and particularly in this remote world we're living in at the moment?
Yeah, great question. Like I said, I think it's really helping build those relationships with key individuals within the company. So here at Candid, we focus the first month in just orientation sessions. There are all of these functional leaders who come in and go in depth about their functions and their KPIs and what success looks like and how they're running it and what are the challenges and all of that stuff. And we also set up a bunch of one-on-ones with key stakeholders and so on. I think we just need to give people the time to sort of help get settled in. And like you mentioned, especially in the remote environment, we need to double down on that and really give them the space to kind of understand the business, understand the players. I think great documentation and like making sure you have all of that in place and your wikis and everything is really helpful. But beyond that, I think is just giving them the time and space to kind of get settled in. And beyond that, I think what has worked well for us is just having very, very clear, like I said, 30, 60, 90-day plans and start slow, right? I think as leaders, we want to make sure that we sort of give them realistic and achievable goals for the first 90 days, if you will. And these could be kind of small wins, but at the same time, we have to make sure that there are achievable goals, because when you have, even if they're small wins, when you have these deliverables that see the light of day, I think it's very motivational for someone who's joining, right? So I think it's a matter of striking that balance between kind of giving them the time and the space initially, the first 30 days or so, just to kind of integrate themselves with the environment, and then 60, 90 days having these kind of small goals that they can actually work on and kind of gain some momentum and motivation and confidence.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Smart. Unni, that's been absolutely awesome. It's been really insightful, and I've really enjoyed listening to your story and your journey on how you got to where you are, and some really good insights for both companies hiring and individuals looking for their next role. So we'll kind of wrap this up now, and last question I have for you is probably the hardest one, and that is, in your words, what is data science and what does it actually mean?
Yeah. It is a term that has many different connotations for many different people. So I think it's a great question. To me, data science is a methodical approach towards solving business problems that is based on testing and experimentation and evidence, right? So if you really break it down, what is science? Science is just experimentation to come up with some sort of an insight or a recommendation that is evidence-based. And so when you add data to it, it just, tells us that let's use data to run these experiments, to identify patterns, to build a set of evidence that we can anchor on so that everyone's on the same page and we don't leave anything to doubt, anything to sort of gut feel. It's all out there, right? And I think it's really important to also understand that there are some problems that we can solve using data science, and there are some problems that we can't, right? And I think the more we are open about it, the more credibility data scientists will get, the data teams will get within organizations. So I think it's also important to make the distinction of where we do play a role versus where we don't. But to me, it is that, right? And I think that's why I say, oftentimes I think people think of data science as like building these gnarly models and building very sophisticated algorithms and statistically heavy outputs. And I have a slightly different perspective. That's not necessarily always the case, right? I think statistics is to data scientists as, algorithms are to engineers, right? It's not like engineers are coding like new algorithms every day or whatever, right? I think stats backgrounds are helpful, but at the end of the day, like if you think about how we can actually drive value from data, it's by solving, business problems.